Welcome to the Romancing Like Swift podcast, where we talk craft and the business of being an author while fangirling over Taylor Swift. We're your hosts, Morgana Bevan
and Emily Jane. On this podcast, we'll discuss what authors can learn from Taylor Swift. There are many amazing Taylor Swift podcasts in existence. We know this, but our focus is on mining Taylor Swift's lyrics and business practices for tips to help our fellow authors excel in their careers.
Today, we've got Michael Evans back with us again to chat about the creator economy, which is a topic that's coming up a little bit in the author community, but I think we're going to start seeing a lot more discourse on it over the next year. I'm very excited to have you back to talk about this.
I'm excited to be here. Yeah, this will be fun.
I mean, the first time I ever saw the term creator economy was from the book you wrote.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I've read that book and I would say I still don't fully understand how creator economy applies to us as authors. And the reason I say that is we're recording this in September. And a couple of weeks ago, I saw a post from Monica Leonel basically suggesting that the idea of creator economy is kind of synonymous with a more sustainable business model for authors, but nobody can put their finger on what that model looks like. And I'm hoping you can.
I definitely have some ideas. And I think at the surface, when someone says even the word creator, a lot of times we don't initially think about ourselves as authors. And I think that is understandable, but also could be a mistake. Because typically when people say the word creator, I mean, it's been used for decades and decades, but in this digital context, it was actually first used in relation to YouTube. For a while, people on YouTube used to call themselves YouTubers or filmmakers or video makers, etc. And YouTube, some creators had started to use this word and say I now call them creators, but YouTube popularized the word creators by referring to the community of people on their platform, not just as YouTubers, but YouTube creators. And then people started to grab onto that word and refer not only to creators in the context of making YouTube videos, but making TikToks, making blogs, making anything. And that includes books of any kind. But what's very funny is most of the YouTube community doesn't really talk that much to the author community. And that's also true, not just about YouTube, but podcasting, blogging, like nonfiction. A lot of like the rest of the digital world seems to sometimes be in its own ecosystem. And then there's just like the indie author world over here in like a corner. Yet we have at the fundamental level, very similar businesses in terms of we're all creating content. We all need to grow an audience. And either we're getting paid in the context of YouTube or a lot of other social media creators, it's advertising dollars that they're making, either from the platforms they're creating on or from like third-party brands. Or in the case of authors, it's either people paying directly for our books or a big subscription program, be it Kindle Unlimited or something of that nature. And music, which we also call musicians creators now too, oftentimes, is very similar to authors in that sense of which musicians aren't really getting brand deals as much, but are also having to face for discovery and are also getting paid largely from either record sales, which have actually gone up a little bit, but are not as big as they used to be, streaming, which is very similar to what we think of subscription books in terms of KU and these big programs. And then, of course, concerts, which most musicians do not actually make much money from concerts. That's just like the top 0.01%, which is kind of what we see in authors. Like there's not many authors who make money from being on the New York Times bestseller list, but there's a few who do. So all of that kind of rant is to just say that I think one of our mistakes as authors is not looking at these other adjacent industries that consider themselves creators and then considering ourselves creators too. Like we're book creators. We're authors as well, just like they're video makers and just like podcasters are podcasters. But we also fall under this bigger umbrella of being a creator. And around that whole big umbrella of being a creator, there's a whole new world, which we'll talk all about, being built around this, around how creative people are able to make a living broadly, called the creator economy. And that's where what we can do as authors is really interesting. And it's why I even wrote the book, Creator Economy for Authors, because I had been in the author space for, I guess at that point, when I moved to YouTube, I'd done it for like 3 years. I had published 12 books. I'd seen a lot of what authors were doing and kind of just thought, oh, well, this is how you run an author business. But then I did YouTube and live streaming and met all these wonderful creators who were doing similar but different things. And I was like, wait, there's a different way to run a business. And likewise, too, just as we don't learn that much from YouTubers, and we probably should learn more from YouTubers, we probably should learn more from podcasters, we probably should learn more from nonfiction authors, probably should learn more from musicians. I think they have a lot to learn from us, too. This isn't a story of authors being behind the curve. Not at all. It's a story of we feel like we're operating in different worlds and we're missing out on the opportunity. Not only could we like work together, but stories can be multiple formats. You can succeed on multiple platforms. You can have many different revenue streams. You can build your business in many different ways. And just because a lot of authors have succeeded in a few specific archetypes doesn't mean that there aren't other ways that we can be successful. And it definitely doesn't mean that there won't be other ways we can be successful in the future. And I think that, like with any sort of innovation or change, oftentimes real positive impact comes not just from looking within, but looking around too. And I think that's the beauty of the creator economy, is that it's this really broad space, taking a step back. And then we start to understand that the skills that we're learning as authors apply to so much more than just writing books, which I think is really freeing for people who might be facing burnout. Like me, like I got burnt out of books and then switched to YouTube and then went back to books. There's nothing wrong with that. It's all connected. So to think that you are just an author is sometimes a limiting belief as well, which is actually hard to say. I consider myself maybe an author first, but I don't consider myself just an author. I consider myself a storyteller always and forever. But storytellers and authors are different in sense, because that's the broader umbrella. And I think so many of us are actually missing out and not living up to our potential because we aren't really grasping that what we're already doing is capable of so much more than we're allowing ourselves to get to realize.
I get what you're saying, but it's the same thing with Monica's post. It's like it goes straight off my head. I think I need tangible, these are the things we could be doing. These are the things we're missing. You know, it's a concept right now, a really good concept, but it's hard to nail it down into our current experience, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's important when now we understand what creators are. You can at least understand like the broader umbrella of creators.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That started becoming a word around 8 or 9 years ago. People started referencing it. Around really 5 years ago, it started becoming a much bigger thing. 7 years ago, though, it was starting to become more mainstream. The creator economy wasn't something really widely used until more like 3 to 4 years ago. And 9 years ago was not a thing really anyone ever said. The creator economy is a bit of a newer thing. And I think it's important then to realize, well, if the creator economy is a newer thing, does that mean it's actually new? And not necessarily, but like, where are we coming from? Because the book that I wrote for authors was like, the subtitle of that book is A Guide to the Future of Publishing. And that future I view as the creator economy, but like, where are we now? And like, where are we coming from? And I think that is the platform economy. So I can describe to you like what the platform economy is and then the creator economy. I think if I describe both, you'll kind of clearly see it. And I'll give an analogy, one that we all probably know and feel as authors do, which is, what is the platform economy? The platform economy took stories, content, produced by creative people that we now call creators, and built the largest business in the world off of that. Amazon did this by taking books, the trust that consumers had in books, also the consumers that read books. Consumers of books tend to be female, which women drive 70% of the consumer economy in the United States. Again, I'm overgeneralizing, but that's what market trends are. 80% of books are bought by women, and then also tend to have higher income than average. So Amazon basically did this to say, can I own every household in America and other English-speaking countries as well, which I'm noting that to note that Amazon does not own the world, but they own a lot of the world that many of us live in. Anyone who makes above $100,000 a year household income, can they spend on average $1,000 or more on our platform a year, right? That was the big kind of strategic vision. And then if we do that, we're going to have all the data, all of this, all of that. But they did that literally from books. Like, we have to remember that. And whether it was a coincidence or strategic doesn't matter. It certainly had an impact. Certainly had an impact. And that's because of who reads books and who the consumers of books are. Okay. But it goes deeper than that. Facebook, off of us creating things for our friends and memes, is one of the largest companies on the planet. YouTube does $35 billion in advertising revenue a year, which, to put into perspective, is literally like Disney itself doesn't make as much money from that, from all of their movies and TV. I think when you throw parks in, finally Disney's starting to eclipse YouTube. That's how big YouTube is now. And these companies have been created within this century. None of these companies even existed that I just mentioned. And Amazon was the only one that existed in the 90s. That's insane. That is the platform economy, where we have these platforms who, again, take the core thing, what's not changing is creators creating stories, creators creating content. But they've taken our data, the relationships we have with the audience, and built the biggest businesses ever. It's had some positive impacts for creators. We can now reach more people than ever. And we can also reach not necessarily even more people, but people from different niches that never would have existed. So that's really cool. And we can see that in books in terms of the types of books being written now. I mean, there's some subgenres that just like would never exist outside of the world that we live in. So the platform economy has done some beautiful things for sure. And I don't want to say where we've come from is all bad, because it's not true. But where are we going now? And I think this goes back to a thesis I've seen from a few technologists, investors, that describes this shift really, really well. But this shift has happened before the platform economy, where the biggest companies in the world were essentially apps. And that is true. Facebook, Instagram, DoorDash, Airbnb, these are all like mobile apps effectively that are the biggest companies in the world. And we're seeing a shift. And before this shift, there was another one, which was the biggest companies in the world weren't platforms, but mostly operating systems. Microsoft being the huge winner of that. Now, Microsoft's doing fine. No one's mad about Microsoft, which is why I'm not even saying too that like YouTube's going to go out of business or any of these platforms are going to be gone in 20 years. I don't necessarily believe that, but undoubtedly, these platforms are capturing more value than Windows is. Windows is not where value is on the internet anymore. And what's happening in this next era of the internet, which there's specific technologies underpinning it, which I talk about many of them briefly in the book, and many of them now are like alive that weren't live when the book was written, which is hilarious. But a sea of converging technologies and behavior shift that are going to change everything about what it means to publish online. And what's ultimately going to happen, and I'm saying like this in definitive terms because I've been doing this for so long, I don't feel like this is a prediction. I just see this wave continuing to happen, is that creators will be the next quote unquote platforms. What I mean by that is that creators over the next 10 to 20 years are going to be the ones who capture in aggregate, this is the key word, trillions of dollars of enterprise value. That means that there's not going to be one creator who becomes a trillionaire, but there's going to be millions of creators who together have businesses worth millions of dollars. And I said like a really important word too, which was enterprise value, which means like there's actually like business assets that are worth something. I don't want to say that any author businesses aren't worth nothing now, but authors typically aren't running businesses, or really any creators, businesses that are exitable businesses that traditional bankers or business people would really view as like really things with that much enterprise value. I mean, there's been some companies that have come in, Spotter in the YouTube ecosystem, which has tried to basically buy out YouTubers' backlists, and they raised $1 billion. No joke. In the author space, we've seen a lot of smaller presses buy out authors' backlists, similar type of thing.
Loom books.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that happening, but it's not anywhere near the scale that it's going to be. Because again, the thesis is that platforms won the last 10 to 20 years. Creators will win the next 10 to 20. And because of that, we're shifting from a world in which platforms take our content and build a world of businesses around it to a world where we take our content and build a world of businesses around it. That's the core thesis. But then there's really two more parts to it, which is like, why is this happening now? And then like, what does this actually mean for us? But I think that describes the moment and where we're coming from. And then this future where like creators are the ones with power. And instead of Amazon taking all our data, taking all this and turning it into one of the biggest businesses ever, we can instead capture that value for ourselves, which then does change everything that it means to be an author.
I would say then our first step in that, now that it's starting to make sense, the first step we as authors have taken is direct sales.
Yes.
Because there's an element there of owning data, isn't there? With
Yes.
platform, they have it all. In our new staging for creator economy, we own the data, and that's what direct sales are, and subscriptions.
100%. It's very funny that because I wrote the book now, I think it was published 2 years ago, and it feels like it's all really started to happen since then. And my book did not cause any of it. I was just noticing things. And I think what I'm noticing now is we saw the trend of customer behavior. That's really what's been driving all of this. Because Shopify's existed for a long time. The ability to sell direct has existed for a long time. But what we're seeing now is customers okay with getting off the big platforms, super used to the internet, frankly, and willing to buy from creators directly, and also to want more than just a story. Instead of being immersed in the Amazon world and giving Amazon an extra $40, $50 a month for random dropship products, they'd rather give you an extra $40, $50 to get that special edition or to get the book sign or to get the merch. And we've already seen these things happening. I think it'll continue to happen. I think there's a lot of things too that we're still in the early days of that behavior shift. I do think, meaning like there's still a lot of room to go with everything you just talked about. And I think what ultimately is going to need to happen is that these sorts of customer curation driven networks where people trust creators more than algorithms, people trust whether that creator is a social media creator or an author, there's going to need to be a business model that underpins how the discovery is taking place. And that's going to be a big moment when that happens and helps drive this customer slash behavior shift. I think that's going to be the next couple of years. And to be a little bit more tangible about that, what that'll really look like is people running independent bookstores online. And the broader thesis of what's happening is creators becoming the new retailers, so that the next Walmart is going to be started by a creator. And I'm not literally saying Walmart, but the idea that you go and can buy anything from them. That literally won't be anything from every creator, but the idea that you're going to this creator to buy more than just what they're creating. And this I'm already seeing happening. And I can't share too much about what I'm doing now, but in high level terms, I'm working for a creator who has products in Walmart that are outselling huge, huge brands. And as a single creator makes more money than, and this is in a public article, so I don't feel bad mentioning this, but I'm still not going to go into details, but makes more money in revenue than what Kindle Unlimited pays out all authors in a year. One creator. That's the scale of what creators are already doing now with this behavior shift. But that was only one of the 5 shifts I mentioned. And I think it's a really big one. Like I said, it's like still early days. I see this business that I'm a part of now alone 10xing the next couple of years here. And I think that this whole space for authors is going to 10x. I think there's still infrastructure that needs to be built, though. We're still early days because you can imagine, I've talked about this before. There's one article I wrote called Main Street is Dead. I think Creator Street Forever or whatever. It was like a play on words, but the whole idea was that the next age of actual small businesses, small shops that we go to are going to be online, run by creators. And there's startups now that are reinventing how retail works, where instead of retailers selling to local shops and then having the local shops on Main Street reselling their goods, it's creators doing it. That's going to happen with authors. I mean, think about like beauty and cosmetics when you give it the author industry. Fashion, so many times we're influenced by the books you read. So many authors, like the businesses of the future, right? We talk about subscriptions now and direct sales. I'm not going to say that's not cool. I think it's cool, but it's not where it's going. And the future is going to be going like, I buy my clothes from this author and not merch. I actually buy my clothes from this author. I get my makeup from this author. And I actually get my makeup every month, which means that author is getting revenue each month from a product that exists because the most valuable thing in the world is data and attention by far. I think that's the first big thing. But there's 2 other big things happening right now, which really exploded since I wrote that book, which is generative AI has completely changed our landscape. And then blockchain, which is totally going under the radar, but is also right now, I think, not having a moment yet, but probably where AI was 3 or 4 years ago, meaning that there's going to be so much more reinvention here because one of my big things about direct sales has been that you just own the emails. It's not really reinventing what it means to actually publish. The underlying network of the internet is still let's go run Facebook ads, which is effectively the biggest corporate network in the world, and bring people from the biggest corporate network in the world just to purchase products in another place and then use BookFunnel to go send them back to another huge corporate network because they're going to read on their Kindle. Direct sales to me, what's cool about it is like it's not a bad thing, but it's a little bit of a farce. And I'm saying this as someone who doesn't have anything against it, but it's like the beginning of it. If you think this is cool and useful, I think it's like 1% of what's possible because in reality, the actual underlying network of the internet has not changed with direct sales. But what's happening with blockchain and what these protocols are getting to, and eventually, we're not there yet, but in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see an entire level of apps built on top of it that look radically different from the apps we have today. But where we're headed, though, is a world in which data isn't owned by corporations and servers that are centrally located. Instead, data is on chain where anyone can access it, which means you own everything and it's portable because it's on chain. It's like email. You can move email clients and you're fine, just like domain addresses, like your website. You can move between different providers. You'll be able to move your data between any app, which means that we'll never be held anywhere. And the future networks you might use similar to Facebook. It might look really, really similar, but you can port all of your followers and everything anywhere else. You own everything. And then what that also will do with what's happening with generative AI now is give us true ownership of our data so that when we're having everything on that blockchain is tokenized, so we can mathematically map on when something's trained using it, when someone creates a derivative or fanfic based on your work, and you can give everyone different permissions and different royalty rates. Bang. And all of it's just in smart contracts that work exactly like you would sign a contract in person, but it's just automatically executed with code. So I think that world that we're moving in, where like the new computing platform is actually software acting as computers, and that's what blockchain is going to change how we do everything. It's going to change who has power entirely and really bring the creator economy to light because no longer will the platforms hold all the data and the keys to the attention, but we actually will. And what we're seeing now is our first step in taking some of that power back, but it's such a minuscule step compared to what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years, which is also why I say it's a guide to the future of publishing. And even now I'm going into a level of granularity and detail that I don't go unless someone asks me about the creator economy, because when people talk about what's applicable today, it is more things like memberships, direct sales, Kickstarters, and crowdfunding. That's where we're at today. But like in 5 years, the world is just going to look completely different. And this conversation is going to be completely different because we're going to see this and it's going to be like, oh. And I think that already what's happened in the last 2 years has made me say things confidently. Creators will win. This is where it's going. It's undeniable. And I think the only thing holding it back is whenever there's disruption, true disruption taking place, incumbents don't want it to happen. And even one of my big kind of things about generative AI, because I'm a technology nerd at my heart and I write sci-fi books all the time, but I have never talked about it as much. And it's not because I've been scared about being divisive. It's because I don't actually find it that cool, which is funny. But why I don't find it that cool is because one thing, if like McKinsey, Amazon, Facebook, and the US government all agree on something, I am scared. And if they all agree that like generative AI is a good thing, it's probably not even that cool. It's probably not that disruptive because the status quo never goes for something that disrupts its power. So why is every platform adopting this? Because of two things. It's a shiny distraction. We don't have to look at the other disruptive technologies underpinning, meaning we could ignore customer behavior and just rag on about this AI technology. We could ignore the fundamental network changes in the internet with blockchain, which also generative AI makes more important, by the way. But then the other thing that it does is actually enhances their power more because generative AI is fundamentally, it's not changing the fact that data is the most important thing in the age we live in and that attention is the most important thing. It's just making it more efficient to capitalize on it, which is why it's a consultant's wet dream and why Accenture, which is a technology consulting firm, made more money than OpenAI. just from consulting on AI, which is also why you see the whole community get into it too, because, and I'm not shading on anyone, there's super valuable resources and education that needs to happen around AI and these sorts of things. The grifters come out because it's like the opportunity is there's more money in consulting, because in reality, like I did an analysis of the store the other day. Like the same authors that were selling in 2020 are mostly selling today. And there's churn, but not abnormal churn. It's not like the market's changed that much. There's only a couple thousand authors making a living. AI isn't radically opening up the market because the platforms still hold the power and there's only so much margin to give. And AI is not creating more customer attention. It's just like making our process of writing more efficient, which I'm not saying isn't awesome or horrible or scary or interesting, but it's not changing what we're doing. That's like my big thing about where the future is going is like, if everyone's talking about one thing, just ignore it. There's something wrong when every big corporation in the world agrees on something. The internet was disruptive. The school that I went to literally did not allow people to run internet startups until in 2008. Mark Zuckerberg got basically kicked out and exiled. Every professor there thought the internet was a sham, and they were wrong, and they usually are. That is how you know, okay, every big company hates the internet, then it's successful. Where I just go, right now is no one's talking about the creator economy. No one's talking about where this is going. And like, this is just the seed that I'm planting in people. Like, this is how you know it's going to be something big, because you're already seeing it. And if these big companies are ignoring it, it's because they're scared. And it's because no one who works for any of these companies or who's existed in this existing ecosystem wants to see a world where you are more powerful than them. And that is, to me, the most empowering thing for us, because if we see it, we can make that future possible. And like I said, something that I think is inevitable, and it's going to look like a future where authors become the retailers, authors become the platforms, and it opens up a world of possibilities, whether it's, again, royalty share, whether it's extension into new media formats without having crazy corporate lawyers involved at every step, because that's how you have to do these things now. Whether it's being able to have control and ownership of your data so that you're able to have like more consistent income, whether you can make discovery revenue off of helping other authors get discovered. Like, this whole engine that is going to come about is going to just increase the pie for authors and change the business models. What you do about it today is the more interesting question, because for that, I have my own personal answer. And for you as an author, I think that answer might be a lot different. In short, the creator economy in 10 years is the world that we're living in. And right now, we're at the transition point. And I'm so excited and optimistic, unbelievably optimistic about where this is going. And for anyone who's getting started today and thinks like, well, this feels like super far out, I disagree, because I've been doing this for 7 years and it's changed a lot. And I'm going to probably be doing this for 20, 30 more. And if we're all planning to do this for a while and we love this, where this industry is going to matter. And it's literally kind of like early internet in like the early thousands. It was clear it was a thing, just like it's kind of clear the creator economy is a thing now, but it's not clear like, is it really going to be big? How big is it going to be? But then like 10 years later, by like 2015, 2016, it was obvious. And then it was just taking off still. But now we've kind of reached this saturation point. I think it's going to be very similar with the creator economy. We're like right now, we're at that early stage where like in the mid 2000s, people were figuring it out. They were the pioneers. But it's going to go mainstream. And when it does, just know that it's going to be a much better world for all of us. And that's, I think, the best thing we could hope for.
Yeah, I think, so you're saying direct sales is the farce of it, but I think it's baby step. In the grand scheme of things, taking the step to direct sales is overwhelming. Like building the Shopify store is overwhelming. Learning e-commerce email is overwhelming. So we're taking, as authors, taking that step now. That's a step closer to us being in this position of business owner and being able to then really claim our business and our data and our IP. And this is what everything you just said made me think of. It's the traditional publishers, the mainstream music companies. 10 years ago, they ruled it. They controlled the publishing industry, they controlled the music industry. Taylor Swift, the first time we've mentioned Taylor since we started. Taylor wouldn't have dreamed of doing half the things she did 10 years ago, because the music industry was a different place. And it's the same with the publishing industry. It was a different place. Most of the publishers are now owned by investment companies. All they care about is IP. They want to own as much IP as they can because that increases their profit. That What is it? It's the company value increases with
Yeah.
the more IP they own. So they don't care about selling books anymore. They care about owning more IP. And this is the thing that we're stepping into is creator economy. It's us. Yes, we're owning the data, but we're also retaining that IP and we're exploiting that IP ourselves. I think maybe we've taken more steps and self-publishing has taken a lot of battle out of bad publishers because, like you said, there's industries, genres in publishing that exist now that didn't exist pre-Kindle that are now killing it. Reverse harem being one of the major ones, the RPG. They wouldn't
Oh,
exist
yeah.
if publishers, if the publishers had been left to their own devices, they would not exist. The publishers, Penguin Random House, didn't think urban fantasy had enough legs to retain authors that had 20 years of experience and decided to just chop off series halfway through because they weren't making money. They were making money, they weren't making enough money for the Penguin Random House. The whole factor is a major decision on why I went independent in the first place after years of thinking I would only be trad. But we've gone a step further. We're not just publishing our English content ourselves. We're handling translations ourselves. We're handling audio production ourselves. The narrators creating their own production companies. With taking every step of every format ourselves. There are now companies that help with Kickstarter fulfillment to help us. I see it as like you do your first couple of major ones and you're using a fulfillment company, but eventually you learn the ropes, you start doing it yourself, you hire the team to do it yourself. And we're taking more control. And I think that's the key to it is the control.
It's huge. The control is, there's anything I've learned, control is everything. It's the biggest thing. If anyone's listened to podcasts I've done in the past, like you probably hear like arguably even more passion now because like everything I've been taught in life over the last 7 years has highlighted that and then some. I mean, like it's still, despite all the things you're saying, which is tremendous progress, by the way, it's such an interesting world. I have one probably controversial point in it to parse out something you're saying more because everything you said was great. But just something I want to highlight is I know what it's like to literally have your platform taken away from you, as literal as that gets. We need to live in a world where that can't happen to anyone. And that's where we're going. But something that I'll say to slightly disagree is I do agree with you in terms of like what traditional publishers are trying to do is agglomerate as much IP as they can and make it more attractive for them to get resold to another private equity firm. That's mostly what's happening. But I don't actually believe value in the media industry comes from intellectual property. And that's radical, but it's also why I don't view, going back to the whole generative AI conversation, why I don't view it as disruptive as many other people do, but more enabling. And this is why I think there's been a tremendous amount of just fear around AI. Because if you believe that IP is the most valuable thing in publishing, that is the most disruptive technology ever. Because it makes it so you can rip off other people's IP really easy. Let's be real, right? You want to create like another version of Harry Potter, but change the names, you got it. Over exaggeration here, but it wouldn't take that long. It's dramatically easier than it ever was. And you could say that for any book. You could say that for your own books. Wow, if it was producing one book that was so hard, like I can produce a lot more volume of IPs, so then maybe it's the quality of it. But then what dictates the quality of it? And it's usually not the literary prizes, it's usually sales. And then we go back to this whole argument of, does good art mean that we're selling? And then it becomes really discouraging because everyone who's not selling, which is almost everyone, because of the nature of publishing, then goes, wow, I suck. And I've been there before. A lot of you might be feeling that now. I'm feeling really discouraged by like all these developments. But I encourage you to think about it a little differently. It's just a reframe. The most valuable thing in publishing is not IP, but it's actually the underlying network of readers. That is what's valuable. What do I mean by this? We can use community as a word for that. There's a bunch of different words we can use for it, but it's really network or community. I think authors probably feel the word community. When I think about it, I like to think of it as network. But why that's the most valuable thing is because as humans, we pretty much are a network-driven species. Almost everything we do is driven by a network of some kind. Now, what is a network? A network is just multiple nodes being connected. You could have a network for anything, a network for how information flows, how goods flow, how people flow, transportation networks. And if we think about our world, like how much of our life revolves around population centers around countries and industries that exist in specific places, around different cultural icons, because there's also language network effects around culture. There's a few sports teams that almost everyone can recognize, and they happen to also be the most valuable. There's a few colleges that everyone recognizes. There's a few cities. This just goes on and on and on for everything. For food, for the brands of food we eat, which in America tends to have a lot of processed things in it. But regardless, this is also true for the stories you read. And the internet has caused there to be two major innovations that I think have already kind of changed everything, but there's going to be the second part that actually changed it. The first thing the internet allowed was anyone to access a network for free. Access, that's the most important word. Pretty much for free. Not entirely, but pretty much for free. And then it also allowed the proliferation of these sub networks. You have the big Amazon network that books move through. But then it's really cheap to create these other networks so that books that were not profitable for traditional publishers to create because they weren't densely enough within the networks that they had access to, transportation networks on the back of trucks, now became profitable. So a bunch of new books became successful because a bunch of new networks formed. But within each little network, within reverse harem, there's a few books that rise to the top because every network is dominated by a power law. Every single one. Culture always grabs onto a few things. Like that's how we are. We're basically a species that's just getting infected by these viruses constantly that make us think and do certain things. Even religion is fundamentally the same way. And if you go to any country, there's usually one religion or one sect of it that has the most cultural power, cultural weight. That's just how the world works. It's very interesting. That's the big thing the internet's done. But the second thing that it's done is by allowing anyone to access a network, it's made the power of individual people radically higher. And because individual people didn't own the network, but corporations own the network, we've seen a bit of that being muted. And a lot of us have felt disempowered because of just how powerful these corporations have gotten. But in this next age of the creator economy, it's all about individuals owning the network, which is going to make this trend that you're seeing and the possibilities that come from it way, way, way greater. But someone like Taylor Swift is very interesting because I think she's a very unique convergence of two things. She happens to be the queen of the ultimate network. She's not a grunge pop star succeeding on this niche SoundCloud thing, which is beautiful, by the way. I love that because of what the internet's enabled. She's basically benefited from the mega highway of the internet and dominated the entire highway. She's the ultimate star. So she's like arguably bigger than anyone has ever been in music. And I'm saying arguably because there were other people at the top of the network for their time, but this might be the most powerful way we've ever been able to connect human beings. So this is probably the biggest star we've ever had. And that's up for debate. I think it's true. But then the next thing that she's been able to accomplish is because she can access these networks in a permissionless way and she can post on her social media. No one's telling her what to do. She's able to have more power to do things that no one else has been able to do, to come up with her own movie, direct the movie theaters, which is wild and innovative. And Taylor, obviously, because she's so big, can do things in the real world, where now, because she's won the internet network, can bend real world networks in her favor, doing 6 concerts and owning the tour and everything. She's won in such a huge way that it's more visible what's happening. But in reality, there's 1,000 mini Taylor Swifts who are authors right now, many of whom might be listening to this podcast, who have won their networks, which might not be as big as the big music one to win all of music. But it's interesting. And again, remember, a proxy for network is community. You could be using that word community, and it would still hold up. And why these communities are so powerful, or networks too, is because networks do one key thing. It's like an ecosystem, perpetuates itself, which is why we see stories like Harry Potter still doing really well, still selling more than most of us would ever help to sell in a lifetime every year, or why Hunger Games, even like that was a big thing. Hunger Games is still pumping out books in terms of sales. And it goes on and on and on. That is the very interesting part of network. And it's why these publishers, I think they think about it like acquiring IP. And it's why they're arguably not great businesses because they don't understand the business they're in. But if they actually understood the business they're in, it's a great business to go buy up like IP that's won a market and bet that it's going to probably stay pretty high up for the next 40 or 50 years. And then, do a little spreadsheet and calculate its forward estimated earnings and then pay a discount on that and reap the profits. Like that's actually like a very good business if you nail it. But it's not a great business if you're thinking about it not based on the fundamentals.
Well, like
Of
we're
what
seeing it with in music with the IP situation, like So Justin Bieber sold his back catalog to an equity firm. And some of the other big 80s rock bands have sold their back catalog as well and made more money off of. I'm thinking the 80s bands, but those contracts were so bad, who knows which bands they were. But somebody has sold their IP, their copyright to their works to an equity firm. And they made more money selling their rights to it than they made from royalties.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting.
But that's the thing, like they're big and still being listened to because, as you say, it's that network. I think in the author terms, it's not just community. The reason those books keep going is because of reader communication, like recommendations. You've got readers constantly going to reader groups, asking for recommendations, and you'll have the same 10 to 15 books being recommended depending on what it is. It's very hard to then break into that 10 to 15 that's constantly being
It
recommended.
is.
Yeah, that's all we're constantly fighting, is to try and hit those readers who are vocal in their choices. It's why book talk has become so influential and why all of us is fighting to actually get views and benefit out of TikTok before everything changes. Because as you say, it's the algorithms. They're favorable at one point. Instagram was favorable at one point. Facebook was favorable at one point. And then the algorithms changed as they became more monetized focused, that they don't benefit us anymore. And the time will come where TikTok will be the same thing. And it's that next step in what you're saying with the creator economy. We're all relying on TikTok right now, and it's scary. TikTok can make me so much money with one post. If that post hits the algorithm right, like I've got a slideshow from August going viral right now that I posted August, so going viral 2 days ago. And I'm already starting to see trickle sales from it. And all we need is that algorithm to change and them to really, really be pushing TikTok ads, or the US government to go ahead with banning in the US. And
Yeah.
suddenly we've lost our easiest tap into the reader community. We have seen a lot of readers coming into the digital, like there's a lot of readers that still don't read digitally. They don't read ebooks, and now they're being introduced to ebooks because of TikTok. There's a changing phase coming, but it's also, we should be learning from past experiences with these apps.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. There's one thing that is a note of pessimism, which is that more so just that change takes longer than people think and could be harder. I think that there's like two converging trends that are very interesting. One is that the most viral an app ever is in terms of like adopting new change is when someone's 13. I was listening to Nikita Bear. He's built like 2 viral consumer social apps, and he studied this religiously. And what he's seen is that past the age of 13, people share things that they do basically 20% less often every year, compounded until you get to like 21, then it levels off. And there's another interesting thing that happens too, that we talk to basically less people in our 20s. It starts to dip off. At 21, we peak the number of people that we talk to. And our social life basically hits like the valley in our 30s and then sticks that way until about 60 or so. And then it starts to climb up again, which is super funny because people wouldn't expect that, but that's what it is, kind of like how things move socially. And if we're thinking about our books as viruses that have to move throughout these different populations, it posits like 2 very interesting things, which I think we've seen this time and time again. One is 13-year-olds are a great audience to write a book for. The most viral hits of the last 20 years largely have been driven by 13-year-olds. If not, you could argue the Colleen Hoovers of the world was certainly driven by majority people who were on TikTok just figuring out that ebooks were a thing, teenagers, but we're praying over 18, but maybe not, and that's okay. But regardless, right around that age, that's who was driving the conversation, which is very interesting. And if you want to create something that's going to like catch, again, mass attention, you should be targeting 13-year-olds. I'm not telling everyone to write their books 13-year-olds, but what ends up happening is like past 13, what we've seen happen is like you basically have to start paying for ads to reach people who are in their 20s because it's like not cost effective to grow virally, which is why it's another reason where we have to look at what these YouTubers are doing. Like a lot of YouTubers aren't spending money on ads. A lot of musicians aren't spending money on ads. A lot of TikTokers aren't spending money on ads, but then realize like who they're also creating for. Like there's an algorithm part of this, but there's also a human nature part of this too. Older audiences literally are more expensive to reach because they just don't talk as much. That word of mouth does not happen as much. So that's one fascinating thing. And the next thing on that too is that the decade of, I'd say the late thousands to certainly tens were defined, I think, by a battle for the home screen of your phone. Trillions of dollars are made and lost on the home screen of your phone. I think that battle is still ongoing for 13-year-olds because that's the time that we change in our lives. But if you're not 13, then your home screen is probably pretty stagnant and probably will be pretty stagnant for a really, really long time. And what we've also seen now, and this is a good thing for the book industry, by the way, but it's just interesting for this whole behavior change. In the United States and most of the developed world, and most of even the developing world now, like there's way less people under 18 than above 50. And people aren't leaving the world as much, which is great. I'm glad people are living longer. There's not as much people being born, which doesn't matter your politics, just a fact that we're seeing less young people, more older people. So what's funny is like the prime reading age population, which is typically people 15 up, is growing faster. It's like the fastest growing segment of the population. So a lot of people, like, because they know what I know, say, oh, build for the kids, and this is where all the innovation is, and the next hot thing that the teens are using. But what's interesting is like we live in a radically different world than we did just 15 years ago, where the fastest growing population are people in their 50s and older. And that's
Yeah.
going to be true for the next 30 years. So as this population of readers, many of them are readers and will adopt that behavior more. What does that do when you have a population that makes the least amount of changes, but is growing the fastest? I think that makes change a lot harder. I'm not saying change won't happen, but I think that's a pause of caution on everything I've talked about today, because I'm literally speaking in terms of 5-10 years, and it might even take longer than that. This is not a short-term thing, because as much as there's things working in the favor of this change, there's tides working against it. And it's also something to keep in mind too, just when we think about our own businesses. When we look at other people's businesses and compare ourselves to other creators, who are they creating for? Who are we creating for? And why is it maybe harder or less harder to reach the people we're reaching? And the answer is usually sociology and network dynamics, or human psychology at an individual level. And in this case, my most fascinating finding of the last couple weeks I've just been pondering on is like that one. Wow, 13-year-olds are who's sharing the most. That's intuitive, but you don't think about it that much. What does that mean for all these other age groups? And of course, there's also that interesting fact that I said that when people in their 50s and 60s start talking to more people because their kids leave the home, people get lonely. There's so many interesting things in that it's like no one knows where it's going, but this is where the CUNY buzzwords become a bigger thing, because readers actually are seeking that, because, oh, it turns out when people hit their 50s and 60s, they're seeking more social connection. Everyone's on the phone now. They're not going out in the world as much, especially post-COVID. All these things that we talk about there's no wonder for it. But if you're like, wow, my readers aren't talking about my books, this is hard. It's like, yeah, think about yourself. Do you talk to your friends all the time about your favorite books? Sad truth is probably not. And if it is, it's a small group of friends, meaning like word of mouth is really freaking hard if you're not like Harry Potter or Hunger Games. There's a reason those books took off to the level they were. It's very interesting when you put it in that respect, because we all like want to be the next Harry Potter, but are you writing middle grade fiction that everyone can read?
It's funny to me now, you've made a point. For context for people listening, I was literally talking to Michael 5 days ago. And 5 days ago, for me, he made a point that drastically changed my plans for 2025. I was panicking yesterday about how quiet my audience is. My readers do not respond to things. Like I can't get them engaged in me going to Vegas, and it's driving me batty. And you've just made the perfect point. Like my reader demographic is 25 to 50.
And that's most of ours. And in fact, that's a younger reader demographic than average.
25 to 50, that's an inactive period for people. The level of engagement I'm getting is really good.
It is. And what I've seen for a lot of authors too is engagement actually picks up for like older readers. Especially now I've seen more of it because the people have become more comfortable with electronics, especially if think about this, like in 20 years, the people who are 40 now are super technologically literate. Like my mom is turning 60 soon, which is really weird to say actually, because I don't view her as like 60. She feels like in her 50s still. I don't know why 60 feels like a big number for me, but I've got a while to go till I hit 60. But for everyone who's 60 now, I feel like most 60-year-olds I've met, they are very technologically literate. That's why in 20 years, when those 60-year-olds are 80, they're going to be technologically literate, and then the 40-year-olds are going to be 60. And it's like, oh, okay, it's going to be a very interesting world. But yeah, no, I say that to most people, like, don't worry if people aren't commenting, if people aren't engaging. That's human nature. Like, the raving fan bases we see and these social media creators we see, Oh, Charlie D'Amelio when she blew up. Think about who was watching her, 13-year-old girls and boys, I will say, but definitely 13-year-old girls. And they talk about everything they do.
The interesting thing is when you focus it on that age at which people start communicating more, and that you're talking right ahead into pension age. And there's already the case in with books, we're always targeting everything at the whale reader. Far more of the population of the world reads like 5 books a year. Far more of the population. Our target is whale readers. A lot of those whale readers are pensioners. They are literally breezing through their library's catalogs so fast, 2 books a day, kind of fast. And that's been my next step is now to really focus on capitalizing that market. And my step is large print, getting large print into libraries. And from there on, then it's a step of we have all these building blocks of our IP, coming back to the IP thing. We own the story, but we also have all these formats we can use. The large print is another part of that I've been neglecting, and a lot of us neglect. And by getting that step done, we're talking about overload. If we're doing it as we go, it's out of the way. Those readers hit that market and they hit that age group and start talking more. The books are already in a format that, in every format they could possibly want, and we're done, It's long-term growth.
Formats are everything. Multi-language is really important, especially because we're seeing we haven't really seen a global reading platform necessarily that really has multi-language markets that are thriving, but just German alone on Amazon is quite the beast of a market. And there's going to be many more German-sized markets that are going to be easier to access in the next 10 years. I definitely think the biggest takeaway that I have had from talking to authors about just in general anything is like a lot of times I think we like to say that the grass is greener on the other side. And a lot of us have audiences that lean maybe 40 plus. And when people talk to me, a lot of times people talk about like how they want the younger readers. They want to get the new generation in. I think that's great, genuinely. We all should be focused on getting young people into reading and growing that. But the fastest growing population is people above 50. In terms of like where the grass is green, I don't know, but the people are growing. Population is growing fast there, which people don't think about that intuitively because you think about like the new people, the young people, but it's like, yeah, but there's different phases and chapters of life. We all go through cycles in terms of what we read and consume. And the group that tends to read the most is the one that's growing the fastest, but that group tends to be older. And it's just another sign to like, don't feel like you need to throw away everything you're doing or that you're doing everything wrong. A lot of times it's one of those things that you could be doing everything right and you just need enough traction where it all starts to spill over and like you explode the overnight success that took 10 years. And you might not be there right now, but that's okay. It doesn't mean you're doing all the wrong things and need to radically change up what you're doing or that you should listen to someone like me and jump on the 5 new trends. There's one thing that's been true throughout all of this. In the platform age, the thing that created value was great stories that lots of readers read. And yes, I tell us about the whole network thing and that matters. That's really it though. A great story. That's not changing. The value of a great story is not going anywhere. And without it, forget everything I'm talking about. And I think that's the big thing to remember too, is if you nail that, all this other stuff, strategy, the business, stuff that I love personally, you can go out and listen to the podcast me when the time comes, or you can go out and talk to someone like me or talk to their authors in the community. This is also what I do for my job. My literal job for the last several years has been whatever the market is, it's like strategy for creators, business and technology for creative people, and it happens to be my passions. Like I come from a very specific background where it's like you listen to someone like me talk and other people in the community who are great and brilliant and smart and might have similar roles to me in terms of what they do. When you listen to us speak, don't think your brain space needs to be occupied with what our brain space is occupied with. Your brain space probably should be occupied with writing an amazing story, having fun, and learning more about what makes your readers tick. My big moment to everyone here is that I think the market as a general sees trend, the mega trend, is it's going to get better, that it's going to keep growing, and that there's going to be more opportunity for you all. You don't have to race or jump into any one thing to have that future come true. Like that future is inevitable. And I see my own personal kind of journey and helping push it along better and faster. Like that's what I want to do. I have super fun with it. And if you have super fun with it, of course, by all means, join me. But if you don't, which is most of us here, we're just like, I want the benefits, but I don't necessarily want to like be at the frontier and like have to deal with all that stress. It's like, you don't need to figure it all out. None of this was about figuring it all out. Like you're actually probably are on the right track and no one ever has it all figured out, which is funny because we're talking about the future of the creator economy. But if you're not like high futurist like me, because that's my number one strength, and Clifton strengths, I should say, then you might actually feel paralyzed by this conversation and you might feel fearful. And I do not blame you for that. Like it's a super valid emotion. I'm telling you, feel that and confront it, not by saying it's invalid and I should dive into the future, but by actually saying it's all going to work out and you're going to be more than okay. People aren't commenting on your posts. No one was talking about people commenting on posts 5 years ago because 5 years ago, COVID hadn't happened. And people who are 50s, 60s, and up who start making more social connections weren't even online that much yet. And now it's all changed. Oh, people are talking about it more now. Oh, I wonder why. There's a behavior shift happening. It's also true that that might not apply to you. And it's still not like everyone's commenting on every post always. That would be rather dystopian. Don't you want people talking to their family too? When you put it in that perspective, it's like, oh, so like things are actually fine. Yeah, they're good. You're good. You're not doing anything wrong. And it's always more art than science. And it probably always will be.
I think your point about high futuristic is one of the reasons why I struggle so much with this concept is that I am also high futuristic. My number one is futuristic. My brain needs to like put tangible things in place to understand something. Like my publishing schedule is a spreadsheet, a laid out colored grid spreadsheet that runs through the entire year. So I can visually see how many weeks I have to write a book. So when it comes to this concept, like my brain wants to go, yeah, this is what it looks like. There's these pieces and that's going to happen. And then that's what you're working towards. And we obviously can't do that yet. But I think like bringing it back to the sustainable point, how does the creator economy make our businesses more sustainable? And I guess in the now terms, what can we use from it now that's going to make burnout less likely? And I think a lot of people are just, our easiest solution is to cut back on output, write less books, and make more use of all of the other revenue streams, like the translations and audiobooks, music, all of the other formats to bolster up that reduced income from writing less books. But is that actually more sustainable? And then we're going subscriptions and Kickstarters. And like every time I look at somebody doing a Kickstarter, I get tired because I can see how much work goes into them doing that Kickstarter. That doesn't feel sustainable to me.
No, it probably doesn't. I get it. I would say this first to like reframe a little bit about sustainability, because I've been super passionate about the concept of sustainability. I myself have struggled with burnout before. I definitely have burned out twice. I might / probably am right now going through like a third phase of burnout. And part of that has to do with everyone has different brains. I'm not like formally diagnosed anything, but definitely relate a lot to people who are neurodivergent, specifically ADHD. So I have a lot of those tendencies, and ADHD burnout is a thing. And a lot of us in the creative community do have these sorts of propensities, and our mind works that way. And if that's true about you, some things are a little bit unavoidable. Like you might kind of live your life in these seasons, as I tend to do. And I enjoy that. I kind of have a concurrent passion. Like the passion is always there of storytelling and all that, but there are certain chapters where, yeah, you can get burned out. But another reframe on it too is I think a lot of us as humans, human nature is to like want certainty. We like certainty. Certainty is really nice. It's why CEOs tell every investor at every public company, right? You can listen to their earnings call, and they're always giving a projection of this is what next quarter is, certainty, or this is the next quarter. They don't know. I mean, when do you ever see there be like a 0% miss on it? Like there's always like either a red or a green, missed or a hit. And that might not be the best example, but another thing is in publishing that we know is true is when a traditional publisher puts a ton of money behind a book, they feel pretty certain it's going to succeed. And they definitely aren't always. But when they make that decision to write that check, they got to have a high degree of certainty, right? And they're trying to make that certainty come true with marketing dollars and all this, but you just don't always know what's going to happen. I think part of being futuristic is embracing the uncertainty of the future. And part of that is that when we want something to be sustainable and consistent get wrapped into the same word. And then we kind of think, well, what's sustainable for me? As if it's like this everlasting question that we just answered. We solved it. We are sustainable now. Like when we talk about moving society to be like a sustainable society, it's like, oh, we'll just make everything sustainable. Like we'll be sustainable. Like we'll stop burning carbon. Like we'll just be sustainable. Like, that's what we'll do. And it's like, you think really like once you do that, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but once you do like X, Y, and cut carbon output by 20%, speaking about climate change now, we're just gonna be sustainable. That's it. We've solved it. Climate change is solved. Like it's all solved. No, that's not how it works. And sustainability is a journey, not a destination. It's an everlasting journey. And you're never going to be fully sustainable. You're never going to wake up and be like, I'm sustainable today. I'm feeling sustainable. This is the most sustainable vibe. We're demure and sustainable. That's not how it works. And what I would say is that you're constantly changing. The environment around you is changing, you're changing, and you're having to figure out what's going to make me feel good today. I think that sometimes when you're not feeling good, when you're burned out, we can kind of get into this existential part of what are all the different things we can do to feel better, right? How do we get the plan to fix it all? Because this feeling sucks and I get it. But sometimes my answer in my life has been like, I have no idea what the answer is going to be. I have no idea where we're going to end up here. How can I feel a little bit better today? Maybe that means going for a longer walk than normal. Maybe that means being outside longer. Maybe that means sleeping in a little bit, taking some extra time, like taking it like one day at a time when you're actually in a phase of burnout, when things don't feel sustainable, is sometimes the way to get back to just a place of feeling a little more normal. And I think a lot of us, because we haven't felt in control, have felt like, oh, well, screw that. I'll ignore that feeling because I have this crazy writing schedule that I have to hit because I have these pre-order deadlines, because I have these pre-order deadlines, because I have to get these page reads, and I have these page reads because I have to get the algorithm to like my book and serve it to more people. And it's only going to do that if I like don't fall off the cliff. So I have to publish every 30 or 90 days or whatever it is. And you can hear me talking faster and all the stress, but it's like, wait, slow down. Yeah, you can do that. But there's one big mindset shift. And it's the point that I want to leave you all with because it's like the biggest point. And it's actually why I'm passionate about the creator economy. And it's like what I got into this being an author wanting. And it's what I've never really been able to have. And I don't think we're really able to have this, but I want us to, and I want to give it to you. But the first step isn't a technology change or a new platform or any of this. It's a mindset shift. And I've said this before, but like mindset really is where it all starts from. And what is that mindset? Like, what is the shift? I wanted to be an author because I wanted to be free. That's it. I wanted freedom. I wanted actual freedom. Freedom to do what I wanted with my time. Freedom to be where I wanted. We could be on a beach or in a mountain. We could write books anywhere. As long as we got a laptop or a notebook, whatever you write with. That's what I wanted. But instead, when I took a gap year to be an author, so after high school, I graduated early, and my goal was like, okay, I'm going to be an author for a year. I thought that year would be the best year of my life. But it was the year that I burned out and in which I gave up on my dream of being an author. And I've not given up on it now, but like I gave up on it. Like I officially was like, I can't do this anymore. Why? Why was the thing that I thought would give me freedom actually gave me the opposite? It gave me tons of stress and it wasn't what I wanted. And in fact, I did this again. I then had this vision around all the technology changes that need to happen and the platform shift. And I got super passionate about that. And I still obviously am. And started a platform for authors and dedicated my whole life to that. And all of a sudden, the freedom that I wanted wasn't that free when I had multiple employees reporting to me, which is nothing wrong with having a team, by the way. When I had constant calls and things because I committed to this thing and I was this webinar and this time, all of a sudden my life was not being run by me. I had a schedule and deadlines and things that I had to hit and do that I had planned that I felt like there was no way out of. And I actually didn't really feel in control. And I guess ironically, if any of you go to my Facebook profile, which is the only place I'm online right now, you can see a little bit of that story. Ironically, that was technically true, which is the really sad part about the story, right? So you can give up your whole life for something, create something, and still not be in control of it. Yes, I would like it all to happen where we can all have a business that we can control in the future so that we don't have to worry about anyone ripping it away, that we can have our own platform, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I'm passionate about that. But there's one thing that needs to happen before that. Because before you have the data, before you have the world built around you, before you have the direct connection to your readers, whether it's blockchain or direct sales, whatever you're doing, whether I'm talking to you now or to you in 5 years, the thing that you need, absolutely need, is the mindset that you are going to control yourself, that you are in control, and that you're not going to let anyone else or anything control you. And what a lot of us get caught up in is the path that someone else has told us, the deadlines that we impose on ourselves because some machine thinks it's the best thing, or some guru online tells it's the best thing, some revenue target that we want to hit, some growth target that we want to hit that ends up ruling our lives. And there's a great quote from Winston Churchill that I think he said in relation to World War I, but I'm not a history buff, but I'm going to paraphrase here, that says, when a metric becomes a target, becomes meaningless. That is the biggest thing. If you can be free from all of these metrics and games that we let rule our lives and actually have freedom, because you as a mindset won't let your whole life hinge on it, you then will give yourself the freedom to step back and change the rules. Step back and change how you're playing. Because no matter what happens, even if everything you've worked for multiple years is taken away from you, you'll be fine. And I'm living proof of that. But you're not going to be fine if you never take that step back and if you never actually take that moment of control where you go, I'm the game maker. I'm the master. I get to set the rules here. It's not X platform or X period deadline or X this. And then you realize, oh, this is where it gets fun. And those rules will change. The game that you're playing might change. But if you are not in control of the game, why are we doing this? We just swapped traditional publishers for slightly higher revenue, an email as our boss rather than maybe a phone call or a letter to an agent. I don't think that's a better life. I don't think that's what we're all here for. And if you're here for freedom, if you're an indie author because you want to be independent, you first have to be independent of your own, frankly, bullshit. And we can all do that for ourselves and create problems for ourselves. But imagine if you got out of your own way and made the target happiness rather than whatever metric you're letting be your idol. I literally think that is the key to sustainability, is just asking yourself that question, being aware when you've gotten pulled by society, pulled by whatever that urge is, to focus on a metric being the target and not your own well-being, and just bring it back there. But if you don't control the game, and if you don't have the mindset you control the game, that you feel out of control, that you have to do this, you'll never be able to make the right decision for yourself. You've already lost. So if you believe like me that creators rule the world, if you believe like me that this is the future, and that this future is already here now, yeah, it's going to get better. And yeah, we're going to have all these cool technologies, but make the future alive in your mind. You rule the world, you make the game. So do it.
Yeah, that's a really good point to end on. Just very quickly, that makes me bounce off of, I think about Elena Johnson's talks on how every book she has, not every book is a top level launch. She's not pulling out all the stops for every book. She pulls out the stops for certain ones. The rest of the time, she'll do the bare minimum. Part of her bare minimum is emailing her list. So that's like a point for authors. A lot of authors are resistant to newsletters. But the fact is, if we're taking the sustainability aspect to it and a creator economy, part of this creator economy is the owning of data. Right now, the two ways we can own the data is through direct sales and newsletters. We own that email list, and that email list, as long as we're growing in the right ways and not just doing all the giveaways for signups of freebie seekers, that newsletter list is invaluable for taking off some of that stress and creating freedom, because of you, I literally am going to do what I want to do next year. I'm going to forget about the adage that you have to write in series to launch a book wide. And I'm going to forget basically my own experience of being a brand new author trying to launch the second book in a series a year after the first came out without telling anybody it was a series. I'm a better marketer now. I have a better concept of the industry, and I have a bigger network already. I may not see it as being that active, but it is a much bigger network than I had 3 years ago. Times change and we learn things, and then it's time to reevaluate the things we think are absolutely critical, that if we don't do them, everything's going to fall apart. Because you're right, it's not worth the stress.
Yeah, I mean, what are we all living for at the end of the day? Being an author is one of these careers where we've been told it's the dream. So we kind of can sometimes put ourselves through things that we just shouldn't, because it's the quote unquote dream. But yeah, it's time to make the dream your dream. And if creators rule the world, there's the monetary and technology future of that, which is obviously exciting to me as someone who genuinely just like, let's all make more money. That's never a bad thing. Let's all grow and gain more power in our businesses. I love that. I love that. But that's not a better world if we're all still anxiety-ridden, stressed out, depressed, not living the life we want. I think if America is a sign of anything, I'm saying this as an American, it's that more money does not mean more of anything. Like, more money just means more money. It could mean, don't get me wrong, there's a point where that's a good thing. And no money is definitely hard. But more money is just that unless it's used for something. And that's the biggest thing I think a lot of us think is going to happen, that we're going to reach a certain point and then it will be okay. And in my last business, I literally had a point of, I won't ever pay myself from this company until an X point. And I would just keep moving the needle further and further down and literally going into debt because I wanted it to keep growing and believe this and believe that. But like, that's insane to drive yourself into the ground so much and keep moving the bar of what success looks like for what. Even when you keep hitting it, you keep being like, nah, doesn't matter. We're going to keep doing it. Looking back, like there were times where I would do like my worst case scenario, best case scenario, middle target of like where I wanted the metric to be that I was determining success. Then would hit the best. I'm like, wow, we did the best I thought we could possibly do this year. I'm still not going to give anything to myself. I'm not going to make myself happy in any sort of way. I'm not going to make my life sustainable because we can go further or we're not there yet. And you constantly kind of feel like there's more. So as someone like me who's achieved far less than so many others, but at least have started a few businesses that have made some money and have had some success, and on paper should have been enough for me, I've gotten caught in the trap that I don't want you to get caught in, which is that, oh yeah, it's good. Let's just keep playing this game. It's like, no, at some point you've got to change the rules a bit, make sure you're okay. And in this business, all of us, 100% of us, start by giving it so much energy and time and not necessarily getting a return on that. So we all start from a place of deficit. When do you start to fill back your well? Because so many of us too don't really fill back our well, get into a deficit, and then just run it. We're not digging any deeper, but we're just surviving. But we don't realize we're going, each and every one of us, into an emotional, spiritual, many times financial, and time deficit. When do you pay yourself back for that? Is that in your business plan when you start to think about, oh, I'm going to quit my job, make this out? Like, when do you pay yourself back for what you invested in? And if you don't do that, why did you invest in it in the first place? Now, because maybe it was fun and all of that, but that's a big thing to think about. And if anyone wants an action item on it, just read the book Profit First. It's a great book. I read it maybe 4 or 5 months ago and I loved it. And I was already starting to realize these things myself 4 or 5 months ago too, where I was like, okay, I think I need to mature in how I'm doing this and how I'm approaching this. And I don't think everyone has the same problems as me, but speaking to people who've struggled like me, that's definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, let's wrap this up with the typical question for the show. What Taylor song are you listening to right now? And now you have to give me a different answer to Thursday. I can't remember what Thursday was.
Thursday was Bad Blood. I'll just Shake It Off.
That's a really good one for today's topic.
Yeah. I feel like it's a vibe. I was thinking the song already started playing in my head. Yeah, we'll do it.
I think mine is Fortnite, mainly because I've restarted the Tortured Poets department 5 or 6 times and listened to the entire thing through on a loop without realizing I was on a loop. So yeah, that's the one I've noticed the most this week.
I love it.
Thank you so much for joining us again and trying to make the creator economy make sense to me.
Did we succeed?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's still a baby step thing. And I think it's very much still a thing that until those tangible signs appear in the industry, there's just not a lot that we can do other than prepare in the data set. Mine does it, like focusing on things we control, so direct sales and our email lists.
Yeah, to be fair too, the next 2 to 3 years, I'm most like passionate about the email side of things as well. And that's like where I want to spend more of my time thinking and building as well, like the email side of things, not necessarily even like an email client. There's a lot of MailerLite type stuff out there, but taking it to the next level of what email looks like. And I think that for all of us, yeah, like if you don't have a mailing list, that's your first step into creator economy. If you don't have a mailing list, have a mailing list. If you do have a mailing list, great, you took your first step.
Now grow it. Pretty much. We did the where can people find you? That might change in a couple of months' time when this releases, but do you want to do it again?
Yeah, no. Facebook.com/Michael Evans Writes. That's where I'm at.
Thank you for listening. Our next episode's probably going to be with Shelf Honecker, unless I rejig things. It's a surprise for everybody next week. All right. Bye.